We have been going through a series of character studies. We've learned about Jonah and Demas and Matthew and Judas and Barnabas and Tychicus and Melchizedek. I don't know if you see a pattern in all that, but they're all males. Some of them are known for their evil deeds and others their good deeds, but nonetheless, they all are males. And so before anyone accuses me of partiality, I'm going to turn our attention to the other gender. The Bible speaks much about females. Some are good, some are bad. For this evening, we're going to talk about a good and faithful servant of the Lord and of the church. Her name is Phoebe. We find her in Romans chapter 16, verses 1 and 2. So if you want to go ahead and turn there, that's where we're going to learn about her. Very short passage, but there's much to say about her. Before we dive into this, and as you're turning there, let me explain why this lesson is so important, especially in our time. The Bible has constantly been accused of being written by what's called male chauvinists. In other words, men who aggressively prove that they are superior to women. Those who try to prove this will take a collection of passages that talk about women that sin. They'll take figures like Jezebel, the witch of Endor, Delilah, Potiphar's wife, Lot's wife, and so on. They'll gather up all these and they'll say, look, you see the Bible brings out the bad women, and so it's portraying women as being bad all the time. But when you look at the Bible as a whole, that's not the case. The Bible speaks much about males who sin as well. I saw someone on the internet who posted this, and they said something like, well, Eve committing the first sin means that she messed it up for everybody, and because of that, the Bible hates women. They chose a woman, and so that's their way of saying, look, that she was the first one to sin, and so everybody's just messed over because of her. However, one cannot change the reality of who committed the first sin. Okay? Yes, Paul brings Eve's sin up in 1 Timothy chapter 2, and he'll say the results of her sin, but he also does that for Adam in Romans chapter 5, and he brings up his sin and the results. So he does have a balance there. Eve apparently sinned first, but she happened to be a woman. Adam sinned as well, and he was the first man. Well, someone might say, well, how about the figurative language in the Bible? Revelation talks about a certain nation being as an evil woman, but in Ecclesiastes we have wisdom being portrayed as a woman. And so there is balance in the Bible. And in the Bible, what we have is certain women who are uplifted, some with great detail: Ruth, Hannah, Deborah, Esther, Mary, and others. These women have served as great examples for women of all time. And if you examine the book of Luke, it speaks highly of women. And for those who accuse the Bible as being hateful to women, they really target Paul. Feminists really, they hate Paul. Not all of them, but a good majority of them will look at Paul and say, well, he's the reason that we're saying these things. Paul was the one who said the husband is to be over the wife. Paul was the one who commanded women not to teach or have authority over men in the church. He's the one that brings up Eve's sin, and so he just has it out for women. And there's many people who believe this. For this lesson, I do not have time to refute every alleged reason why people say that Paul is a male chauvinist. Instead, I want us to consider how Paul spoke highly of women. And we're going to look at an example. In Romans chapter 16, verse 1 and 2, we have this example, and it's of Phoebe. Now, yes, it may not be as long as some people might like, but it's an example nonetheless. Notice what he says, 16 verse 1, I commend you to Phoebe, our sister, who is a servant of the church in Cenchrea, that you may receive her in the Lord in a manner worthy of the saints, and assist her in whatever business she has need of you. For indeed she has been a helper of many, and of myself also. This is actually the only passage we have about Phoebe. It is not as much information as compared to others, but just enough to get great lessons for us. And by the way, the picture on the PowerPoint, that is actually Sankria today. So we're talking about a real person in a real place in a real time. He talks about Phoebe. What does the passage not teach? I want to hit that first, and then we'll look at what it does teach, because this is important. It does not teach that the church can have the specific office of a female deacon. That is a huge teaching out there, and it has crept into the church. And I bring this up because those who try to validate their decision to have a female deacon, they will go to these two verses. They will go to Phoebe. The word servant in verse 1. It is a word that means minister or servant. It is from the Greek word diakonos, and maybe you can hear kind of the other word that we use, deacon, diakonos, deacon. It can be translated as deacon. That's the way it's translated in 1 Timothy chapter 3, when it's given the qualifications for the specific office of a deacon. And because of that, they'll say, well, since that's the same word, then Phoebe was an official in the church. She was a deacon. She had that specific office that Paul talks about in 1 Timothy 3. But the word is not isolated in the official sense. Okay? Now, we know it's in the official sense in 1 Timothy chapter 3 because there's qualifications. Those who have these qualifications can serve in this office. So we know it's an office. But it's not always used that way. When you look at passages like Romans chapter 13, specifically in verse 4, the civil government is talked about as a minister to you. He's talking to the church. And he says that the civil government is a minister to you. That word minister is the same word, diakonos. And so the civil government is basically a deacon. Does that mean that the government is a certain position or office in the church, or maybe those in the government, those individuals can have a place in the church? That's not what it's talking about. And then when we look at Jesus, Jesus spoke to the multitude. He said in Matthew 23:11, "But he who is greatest among you shall be your servant." Same thing in Mark. "If anyone desires to be first, he shall be last of all and servant of all." That's Mark 9 and verse 35. But one big one is in John chapter 12 and verse 26. There we have the words of Jesus, and he says, "If anyone serves me, let him follow me, and where I am, there my servant will be also. If anyone serves me, him my Father will honor." Servant, diakonos, deacon. If anyone serves me. Jesus wants everybody to be a deacon in the general sense, not in the official sense. We have to serve in some way, but that does not mean that we are all deacons in the official sense. That would contradict 1 Timothy 3, because not all of us fit those specific qualifications. Now going back to Romans chapter 16, in verse 2, Paul says, "Assist her in whatever business she has need of you. For indeed she has been a helper of many, and of myself also." This does not mean that she was going to be the boss, so to speak. She was going to tell people what to do as a deacon would, even if it was in a kind manner. It just means that she was going to need help. And so whatever she needs, help her, because why? She helped others. And let's just say she had official business to tell the church that they need to do. It would not necessarily come from her. It would come from Paul. A sister cannot be in the office of a deacon, but what she can do, it pleases God, and it helps the church. We get that from this passage as well. Now, this passage is not built just to help us refute this false doctrine of what people call deaconesses or female deacons. Although we can look at it and say that's not what it means, but let's focus on what this passage does mean. It shows that she's worthy in the capacity that she is in. This takes us to the next part of the lesson. What does this passage teach us? First, it teaches us that Paul respected women. He commended them. He greeted them. In this chapter, when you read on, you see all these names. He's greeting different individuals. He greets 26 individuals, okay? And before he gives the greetings, he puts Phoebe before all that. He talks more about her. And then in the actual list of the greetings, he says Priscilla first. And so, this already does not sound like a male chauvinist or someone who's trying to degrade women. Furthermore, there's other women like Priscilla, verse 3, Priscilla and Aquila. And notice what he says, my fellow workers in Christ Jesus. So he says some good words, commending words. Drop down to verse 6, greet Mary, who labored much for us. Again, good words. Verse 12, there he says, greet Tryphena and Tryphosa, who have labored in the Lord. Greet the beloved Persis, who labored much in the Lord. Again, good words. Drop down to verse 15. And then he says, Julia. And then Nereus and his sister. Though we don't have the sister's name, he still mentions the sister. And so again, he gives this list of names, but he's not showing partiality. He's not just showing a list of names of male figures. Now, in the ancient world, all roads lead to Rome. You may have heard that. Well, that's literally true. All the roads in the Roman world all led to Rome. And so it was easy for everyone to have access to Rome. Rome did this so that they can have better control of their territory. But since this was the case, all the roads and all the different traveling channels or ways that they used with their boats, they all had a way to get to Rome. And this is why when he's writing to Rome, he's never been there. And yet he knows a big list of people who are there because a lot of people go to Rome. And he says greetings to them. And when he speaks about the women, he speaks uplifting words. Second, women can be great workers in the church. Okay, so she was not a deacon in the official sense. That doesn't mean that she was worthless. That doesn't mean that God looked down on her. She just had another job to do. That's it. Phoebe was trusted to travel far to the church in Rome. Here in the map, if you notice, the red dot to the right is Cenchrea, and the one on the left is Rome. And this is where she had to travel. Now, it's possible she went all the way in the land, since all roads led to Rome, or she went to land and sea. Whatever the case is, there's a huge amount of space between the two. And Phoebe was trusted to travel far into the church, to the church in Rome. The congregation, they had to receive her. Look at there in verse 16. Verse 1. I commend you to Phoebe, our sister, who was a servant of the church of Cenchrea, that you may receive her in the Lord in a manner worthy of the saints. Okay, so he's saying receive her. In verse 1, I commend to you, Phoebe. I commend to you is basically like saying, I can vouch for her. Yes, you can trust her. You got my word. Take my word for it. Trust her. So the congregation in Rome did not know her personally, at least not the leaders, which makes sense because there's a huge amount of space. And so when she got there, she needed proof that she was there for the business of Paul. And Paul says, receive her. Okay? It is plausible that she had the letter with her. If not, it definitely made it with her when she got there, because when she got there, they would have read this and said they had to receive her. It was a command, and she would have been right there. Okay? Why did they have to help her? Other than just because that's what we need to do. She was a helper of many, and of myself also. Paul needed help, right? He needed help from males. He needed help from females as well. Now, he could have taken this help, agreed to have the ladies help him, but not give them acknowledgement in the letter and just show all the men that helped him. he was not like that. He showed, look, I need help, and she helped me. That does not sound like a male chauvinist. That does not sound like he degrades women. Third, there's power in the gospel. The fact that she was from the city of Cenchrea reveals how far the gospel spread. Now you consider the map as we zoom in here in Cenchrea. Cenchrea is right outside of Corinth. Now I know you can't tell from here, but there's 9 miles in between the two. And Cenchrea is on the sea or the seashore, so it's a seaport. It's a small village. Corinth is huge, big city. But then there's this other village over here, very small. But the gospel made it to both. It made it to big cities. It made it to villages. And in Corinth, there was a congregation. And in the small village, there was a congregation. And that's where she's from. And when you do a good study on this area, not just Corinth, but in Cenchrea and everywhere, there was pagan worship all over the place. In Cenchrea, in this area, they had the temple for certain Greek gods. But the gospel reached them, and there was conversions. Phoebe's name derives from the pagan deity Phoebus. She lived in a pagan society. They believed in these gods, and that's why they named their children after these gods. Phoebe is one of them. But she was not a worshiper of Phoebus. Paul would not have vouched for her. But even though she grew up in this society and this family life and this way of life, she heard the gospel, she obeyed it, and she proved her faithfulness, and she was commended for her work. Brethren and friends, the Bible does not hate women. The Bible presents true gospel success stories with both men and women. Paul did not hate women. Romans 16, 1 and 2 is one of the many verses that teach us that how we ought to treat women. We are 2,000 plus years removed from Phoebe, and yet she still serves as an example for all the ladies in the church today. Little information given about her compared to other people, but much to say about her character. Just the fact that Paul mentioned her and talked about her, it says much about Paul's character. And because it shows something about Paul's character and the way he wrote and what he wrote, it shows us something about God. 2 verses. We learn so much. And the information we have here, even though it's small, it's still more than everybody else that's on this list. And so yes, God cares for all people, all souls. We ought to be glad we serve a God who shows no partiality. Praise God for his love for all souls. Those of you who are here, friends, those of you who are not Christians, do you want to obey Christ? Whether male or female, he wants to forgive you. He wants you to obey the gospel. He wants you to look at individuals such as Phoebe and others, whether there's a great amount of information or a little bit, and he wants you to look at their example and say, God is willing to forgive them. Even though they sacrificed to false gods in heinous ways, God gave them the gospel and they were receptive and he forgave them. If that's true for them, and it is, it can be true for you as well. God wants to forgive you. If you're ready to come to Christ, why don't you come now as we stand and sing.